So trigonometry is really just a relationship of triangles between sides and angles. And so you may have heard this before, Sohcahtoa. So those are the main functions. So we have any central angle theta. We could have the sine of theta, the cosine of theta, and we could also have the tangent of theta. So if we think about Sohcahtoa, it means opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, and opposite over adjacent. So if I have some triangle, which I'll do my best to draw. All right, that's pretty good, pretty good. That's theta. Here's the opposite side. Here's the adjacent side because it touches. And then here's the hypotenuse. So the sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. The cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. Sohcahtoa. Pretty neat. But we also have what's called the cosecant, the secant, and the cotangent. Now the reason I wrote these in this order is because these over here are going to be the reciprocals. So the cosecant and the sine are reciprocal. So if the sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosecant is hypotenuse over the opposite. Secant would be hypotenuse over the adjacent, and the cotangent would be the adjacent over the opposite. Really straightforward. So here are some pictures, and here are some problems. So let's find out. Here we just want to find the sine. So here's our reference angle theta. So the sine of theta, if we go back to that chart, it's the opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, the opposite side here is 6. And the hypotenuse is 2 root 13. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, so we get 3 over root 13. But we can't have a square root in the denominator, so we need to rationalize it. And we do that by squaring this. We can't just square it, because that would change the value. So if we multiply by root 13, that does the same process. And we have to multiply the numerator by the same to keep this equal to 1. So we get 3 root 13 over 13. And that's our answer for number 1. For number 2, tangent. So the tangent of theta, there's our theta, that's our reference angle. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So the opposite side is 16. The adjacent side is 12. And so we can reduce that. They both have a common factor of 4. So we get 4 over 3. Simple enough. Secant. Well, if the cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, the secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. So our hypotenuse, if this is our reference angle, hypotenuse is 5, and the adjacent is 3, 5/3. And finally, cotangent. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so that's just adjacent over the opposite. So if this is the reference angle, the adjacent side is 15 and the opposite side is 20. So that leaves us with 3/4. And that's it. That's actually it for the lesson. Really, this has to do with rationalizing a denominator, multiplying, dividing by fractions, but also just realizing this Sohcahtoa and also these cosecant, secant, and cotangent functions as well. So make sure that as you go through this, you understand these trig functions and you're able to know these formulas and know these relationships. I would recommend that as you work through problems, you keep this in front of you and you refer back to it, and then that will help you remember them a little bit better.